Well, that started out pretty well. 17-3 lead at one point for the Broncos with just a few minutes left in the second quarter, and that was as good as it got because after that, it was basically all Jacksonville Jaguars. The Broncos end up getting 5 sacks on the day, getting their first turnover, so we're done with that part, right? Don't have to argue about when are they going to get sacks, when are they going to get turnovers. Okay, they got them. What they didn't get was a win. Almost doubled up in time of possession, 39 minutes and 12 seconds to 20 minutes and 48 seconds. The Broncos were basically helpless to stop the running game of the Jaguars in particular. And then by the time they had to be sucked in to try to help with that, Gardner Minshew kept doing his thing. Leonard Fournette, 225 yards on the ground, including an 81 scamper, 81 yards down the field there. It's a remarkable game. They were just steamrolling the Broncos, finished with 38 carries for 269 yards. You want to do the quick math, that's 7.1 yards per carry. Yeah, that is how they roll. Boy, did roll they did. I mean, that was phenomenal. Really impressive power football, and the Broncos had no answer for it. We've seen this team at times have some challenges with tackling. Think back at the opener with the Raiders, Josh Jacobs sneaking through for a 28-yard gain, which was really should have been about a 4 or 5-yard gain. It just kept breaking through guys left and right. But nothing like we saw on Sunday with Fournette simply plowing through everybody over and over and over again. An absolute sledgehammer performance for Fournette and the Jaguars. For lack of a better term, basically imposing their will on the Broncos. Thanks to that big gain, too, by the way. In only 4 games this season, Fournette is up to 404 yards. Last season in 8 games, he had 439. So, yeah, there you go. Rough performance for the Broncos in the second half, especially. A careless penalty by Joe Flacco basically lets the door kind of creak back open for the Jags, gives them a little momentum as they sneak back into that game, and then they did the rest. The halftime adjustments were all Jacksonville. The Broncos actually had a good moment here. They drove late. They got all the way down in a late performance there. They score with about 90 seconds left. Cortland Sutton gets a pass from Flacco. And you think the Broncos have had it, that their defense ought to be able to hold them? No chance. In 1 minute and 32 seconds, the Jags march all the way down the field, 60 yards, 8 plays. Lambeau hits that field goal, you heard it, and bang. The Broncos, 0-4. 8-game losing streak, as you heard, going back to last year. That sounds bad. But I'll argue that it's really worse than that. If it's an 8-game losing streak going back to 2 years, and you're talking about the same personnel and the same coaching staff and all that, okay, you kind of know where the problem is, right? It's at least easy enough to identify. This is an 8-game losing streak with 2 different starting quarterbacks and 2 different entire coaching staffs. That's a real problem. So it points to something more systemic than just the coaches, than just the players. Well, if you remove the coaches and the players from the equation, all that's really left is the front office, maybe the training staff. We'll save a little bit for them over the course of the show, too. But, of course, Bradley Chubb, the big news out of it, the Broncos 0-4 is one issue, but then Bradley Chubb with a partially torn ACL. See ya. Done for the season. Discomfort in his knee this morning, sent to the MRI, which revealed the partial tear. Came back in, by the way, and even caused a fumble after tearing the ACL. And you can say it's heroic, I guess, Or you could look at the Broncos coaching staff, especially if you saw the play happen or have seen it on replay where he kind of hitched up, engaged the blocker. How, if you're the Broncos, I'm look, everybody, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend I'm a doctor. So I'm not trying to speak outside of my lane. At the same time, a guy who was your first round draft pick last year, the 5th overall draft pick, and your most important young player on your team, in your whole franchise, has an injury that could be anything that ends in CL, MCL, PCL, LCL, ACL, whatever. All of them. All the CLs. What in the world are you doing putting him back in? You don't know if the injury was made worse by him going back in. You don't know if it made a difference at all. You don't know. But it was a partial tear. Broncos are very lucky by going back in after tearing it that he didn't tear it all the way through. And this has been something systemic for the Broncos. Keep that in mind. They had 4 big money free agents: Joe Flacco, Juwan James, Kareem Jackson, Bryce Callahan. Callahan and James especially had lengthy injury histories. Jackson, lesser so, but some. All of them but Flacco were out of the game. Only 4 games in. Callahan's with the complications from the injury he had last year. The Broncos somehow overlooked that. This is your show, the RamosLaw.com text line, 303-713-1043 is the number. You can call it or text it. Either way, get on. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about the Broncos' future? What are your thoughts about what the coaching staff is doing, the front office, the training staff, all of it? This season feels like the Broncos in those old Roadrunner cartoons were the coyote, and he strapped on the rocket boots and he just flew over the canyon. Right now, he's just holding the sign that says help. We're waiting for the big puff of smoke at the end. We'll talk about that next. Denver Broncos are 0-4 and now without Bradley Chubb for the season. If you look at the Broncos depth chart, they have rookie Justin Hollins as his backup. Probably makes sense. Hollins had been helping here and there on the inside as well. Now, either he or Malik Reed. Malik Reed is listed as the weak side backer, backing up Von Miller, but obviously you can switch them if you'd like. One of those two guys is going to get the opportunity to prove themselves. There really isn't anyone you can grab off the waiver wire and immediately plug them in. Wouldn't make sense, at least. The Broncos have said the next man up stuff for a few years. Well, there you go. At the moment, it appears to be Justin Hollins. So, for the Broncos, now 0-4, heading into L.A. next Sunday for a Chargers team that is rounding into shape a little bit. Obviously, they've had injury issues of their own. But Chargers did get Melvin Gordon back. And it seems like this is going to be a really tough go for the Broncos in L.A. It really does. This is a team with the Chargers that is just better 1 through 53 than the Broncos. I think we know that. I think anybody who isn't being realistic about this would consider that shocking. But, yeah, the Chargers are better. Chargers had a much better record last year. They didn't lose an immense amount of important personnel. So you have a road game that at the moment, especially after this loss, you go face a Chargers team that won 12 games last year. And you look like a disaster. So, Broncos have a very tough game in front of L.A. Let's say they don't win that, which sounds, pretty realistic to me. Now you're looking at 0-5. Then you take on the Tennessee Titans at home. Again, that looks like a winnable game. Jacksonville came in with a losing record. Tennessee is 2-2. We'll see. Tennessee, however, it's worth noting, in the AFC South, where every one of the 4 teams in it are 2-2. Tennessee is the only team that has a plus point differential. The only one. Oddly, the Texans and Jaguars have exactly 0. They've given up the exact number of points they've scored. And the Colts are -8 after losing to the Raiders. So the Titans aren't a pushover. But let's say Denver gets that. You think they beat the Chiefs? Come on. Think they go to Indy and beat the Colts? Maybe. Maybe they do. So you're looking at maybe a 2-6 start for the Broncos at best. At the halfway point of the season, 2-6 at best. Maybe 1-5. Or pardon me, 1-7. Maybe 0-8. This Broncos team looks outclassed. They were able to play a decent most of a half of football. Then Joe Flacco made another error, another interception. I know that the Jags only got a field goal off of it, but nevertheless, you have a game, and you know how it works with football, obviously. You've watched it long enough. You go into the halftime down 3-17, and you haven't really done anything in the entire second quarter. You're feeling like this just might not be our day. But you get a turnover, you feel good about yourself. You get that turnover and turn it into points, you feel like, oh, hey, okay, we're right back in this. We're down 11. Touchdown and a field goal. We can get these guys. Then you come out in that third quarter with a dominant 16-play, 10-minute and 24-second drive that ends in a touchdown. And all of a sudden, it's 17-13, and it felt like Jacksonville might as well have been up by 10. It's sort of amazing the Broncos even had an opportunity to punch back. when it was 23-17. The 75-yard, 6-play drive in 1 minute and 22 seconds that got them back in the lead was really impressive. But it ended up not meaning much because the defense just wasn't there. It's hardly the first time. And that's the problem for this team. When you try to locate what the issue is there is no issue that's it. You can't look at it and say, it's this is the Broncos' problems. There's all sorts of problems involved. It's not one thing that you can fix quickly, and that means there is no quick fix. The Broncos are averaging 349.3 yards a game on offense. That puts them in the bottom half of the league. On defense, when it comes to just yards, they're surrendering the middle of the pack there too. So all of it ends up being just about the same. And you can't necessarily look at it and say the defense is the problem, the offense is the problem. Well, they're both the problem. They're both the problem. Is the coaching the problem? It could be. They added a little more pressure this time. The defensive play calling I thought was better, but guys weren't executing. Shelby Harris said after the game, missed tackles, gap assignments, stuff like that. Same stuff, different week. Although he didn't say stuff. When you hear one of your starters say missed tackles, gap assignments, stuff like that, same every week, then it's probably fair to also question the coaching, isn't it? If guys aren't getting better at these things, the fundamental, look, gap assignments and missed tackles, tackling and knowing where you're supposed to go are the two building blocks of defense. They're the two basics. That's the stuff you start with. If you don't have that, what do you have? What have the coaching staff been doing? I'm not stunned that the Broncos are 0-4. I'm really not. I predicted on 104throughthefan.com prior to the season the Broncos would win 7 games, and I felt I was maybe being a little generous. Probably should have said 6. But I was thinking of that near the top. This is a team that just isn't as good. The only team that they were better talent-wise for sure is Oakland. Maybe they were better than Jacksonville. I don't know. Jacksonville's quarterback looked better than Denver's quarterback. I'll tell you that much. And he's a rookie. Curious to see what you think about it. RamosLaw.com text line is always active, 303-713-1043. Give us a call. Give us a text. Let me know what you think. And it's interesting to see where they go. There is a lot of we'll get to it, but there's a lot of information, obviously, a lot of feedback on the text line. And I would say that a few people maybe see it more positively than I do at the moment. And that's good. Tell you what, if you see something positive there, cheer me up. They got sacks, right? We were talking about getting sacks. They weren't able to get a turnover, but they got the sacks. They got 5 of them. Wasn't that supposed to be the fix? Wasn't the fix at all. They turned the ball over and they didn't get one. Well, there you go. By and large, in this league, if you do the math, how many times teams score after it, when you lose a fumble, you've given the other team 3 points. When you throw an interception, you've given the other team 4. The reason the odds are different, of course, is it's easier to return an interception than a fumble. But if you were to just to break it down in the simplest concepts, mathematically, that would be the trick. Fumble is worth 3 points, and interception is worth 4. The Broncos threw an interception. They lost by 2. Jaguars didn't turn it over. Boom. There's more to it than that, but the idea of breaking down the problems with the Broncos, this is where it gets complicated. The turnover was enormous, even though it only gave up 3 points. But it was enormous. The defense's inability to tackle even more so. And it feels like every single time someone sticks a finger in the hole in the dam, 3 more pop up. Got David calling in. David, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you, Sean?
All right.
Good. Thanks for taking my call, man. I'm kind of, I hate to contradict myself, but I kind of see both sides. But I've always been a positive guy, but it's hard to be positive. I was there at the game. Everybody could say officiating was a problem with that last one, but I want to. Good teams overcome that, and like Bill Parcells said, you are what your record says you are. Easily we could be 2-2, but at the end of the day, man, I think that if they keep this up, like if they're 0-5, if they're 0-6, maybe 1-7, I don't know. It's like, how long is it going to be before, Drew? I know he's on IR till the beginning of November, and I'm not blaming Flacco. First of all, he hasn't done. He's a guy who needs a lot of pieces around him. He's a good quarterback. He really is, but he's not. That interception that you were mentioning, it changed the momentum of the game. We could have easily gone up 20-3, 25, even 17-3 if McManus misses the field goal. My point is that this team on paper has talent. They do. They have talent, and I don't think Fangio is the right hire. 4 weeks into it, it just doesn't. It doesn't seem right, man. I'm not saying they should have held on to Joseph, but get yourself in the booth, Vic. Go do something that you're good at. Stay in the booth. If you have to let the coordinators coordinate, then stay in the booth and do what you do best and cater to your talent. We're not that far from Chicago. Talent wise, I don't think that Chicago is a superior team. And it's frustrating as a fan to see this. So I think that, hey, if this doesn't get better in the next 3 weeks, you start Drew Lock, you see what you got in him. I know they restructured Flacco's contract or whatever through next year, but it's the NFL. Anything could change. But start Drew Lock, see what you got in him. If you don't have the pieces, then go find a quarterback, man. And I hate to say it's all on the quarterback because it's not, but it's a big piece of it. And we haven't had it since Peyton. That's all I wanted to say, man. Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. I think that there's a lot of good points there. And when it comes to Drew Lock, he's not eligible, by the way, to return until week number 9. But I'm with you. If the season is completely lost, I think the playoff chances went bye-bye with this loss. They were already very, 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 very slim. But they probably went bye-bye after this one. If you were to look at the guys at Football Outsiders who really crunched those numbers there, the Broncos' total percentage chance of winning the playoffs is down to 2%. 2. The only team in the AFC that has it worse is Miami. Even the Bengals, who lose tonight, drop to 4. Well, the leader of their division is 2-2. Leader of the Broncos division is 0-4. So playoffs, no. Even if you believe that a 9-7 team could somehow make the playoffs in this division, that's fine. But that means the Broncos have to go 9-3. What have you seen that makes you think they can go 9-3? And what have you seen that makes you think that, look, they haven't been able to get past Oakland, right? They could lose 3 more games in total to get to 9-7 if they had a chance. 3. Well, I'll tell you what right now. I know diehard Bronco fans might be frustrated, but you can write off 2 of those to Kansas City. Denver's not even in the same area code as the Chiefs right now. It's not even close. There's 2 of them. So your margin for error is very, very slender. You get 2 against the Chargers. Again, the Chargers won 12 games last year. Think you're going to get them both? I don't. Maybe you get one. There's all 3. So that means Tennessee, at Indy, home at Cleveland, at Minnesota, at Buffalo. Buffalo almost beat the Patriots despite turning the ball over seemingly every 5 seconds, by the way. At Houston, home against Detroit, and home against Oakland. You have to sweep all of those. Every single one. And what's crazy about that is presumably that won't get you into second place in the AFC West. Let's say the Broncos somehow do that. They get to 9-7. They somehow do that. They're probably still behind the Chargers. Or they won't have the tiebreaker with the Chargers. Which means as a third-place team in the West, no other second-place team can be ahead of you. The Bills are already 3-1. So the Bills have to go 6-8. Pardon me. 6-7 in that span. It's Monday. My brain's not math ready yet. 6-7. They're 3-1. They gave the Patriots all they could handle, even with a bad performance. And you think that team's going to go 6-7? They still get games against the Jets and the Dolphins. By the way, those teams are combined 0-7. So your only path realistically to the playoffs, you won't be able to jump the Bills. You have to somehow beat everybody but Kansas City and maybe one against the Chargers, and then also, by the way, get ahead of the Chargers. Otherwise, you can't get there. So forget it. Relax. Move along. The Broncos aren't going to the playoffs. Figure out something else to do. You can feel free to schedule that ski trip in January. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the long weekend. The Broncos won't be in it. So go ahead. Now go ahead and get your passes ready. Take the family up. Go hit the slopes. You won't miss anything. Broncos won't be playing. Broncos season comes to an end on Sunday, December 29th. At home against the Raiders. That'll be the end of it. So anything after that, hey, feel free. You probably care about the Super Bowl, but, it means your Wednesdays, your entire January is available. So go have some fun with that. But that's the reality of the situation. You're looking at another season with no playoffs. You're almost certainly looking at another season that has a losing record. The only way that they can have a losing record is the Broncos only lose 4 from here on out. They go 8-4 after starting 0-4. Okay. So what do you do? I agree. I agree with our caller that said Drew Lock should start when he's available. Yep, he sure should. I don't care what the contracts are. I don't care about any of that. I don't care what you plan to do with Flacco. When your season is lost, you should play your young guys and see what you've got. Because you're going to have a pick in the first half of the first round at the very, very worst, and quite possibly you might have another top 5 pick. So, you need to find out if Drew Lock is the quarterback of the future. It is not all quarterback. The offensive line is incredibly important, and the Broncos have been either neglecting it or not doing a particularly good job with that for years. I think Shelby Harris is miscast as a nose tackle. I think that's part of the problem the Broncos are having on the defensive line. But if you don't have the quarterback, you don't have a chance. Not in this league, not the way it's run right now. You just don't. Look at the Jaguars. They lose Nick Foles. They felt good because they got Nick Foles. Super Bowl champ, talented guy. They felt good about it, and they should have. He gets hurt. Oh, no. Oh, well, wait. You know what? You had a rookie. You threw him into the fire. He looks good. I don't think Gardner Minshew is going to the Hall of Fame or anything, but I can tell you what, he can play in the NFL. He can start in the NFL. Because he's 2-1 as a starter in the NFL. So, there you go. You have to find out what Drew Lock can do. If you believe he's going to be your guy going forward, shouldn't he at least look better than Gardner Minshew? A 6th-round pick? Lock's a 2nd-round pick. And Minshew had to go in the very first game. So, in theory, even though Locke hasn't been able to practice, I mean, he should still be better than Minshew, right? Well, if he's not, then what does that mean? You're probably using that first-round pick against for a quarterback again. You essentially have to. There just isn't an option. So you're going to have to find these things out. There are other concerns, too, for the Broncos. And we'll get into this all week, I guarantee you. They have more than a few free agents. That's worth noting. And they are not insignificant free agents. These are guys that you're used to seeing. After this season, Devontae Booker is an unrestricted free agent. Not a huge part, but you have to decide what you want to do. Andy Janovich, missed all season thus far with an injury. Unrestricted free agent. Connor McGovern is your starting center. Whether he should be or not is beyond the point. He is. Unrestricted free agent. Shelby Harris is your starting nose tackle. Whether he should or shouldn't, beside the point. He is. Unrestricted free agent. Adam Gotsis, unrestricted free agent. Corey Nelson's your starting middle linebacker now, apparently. Unrestricted free agent. That doesn't even get into some of the other guys here. Emmanuel Sanders is an unrestricted free agent. Derek Wolfe is an unrestricted free agent. For those of you who are paying attention with the other names I mentioned, that's your entire starting line on a base 3-4, by the way. All unrestricted free agents. Wolfe, Harris, and Gotsis. Oh, and we want to look at the defensive backfield? Will Parks, Justin Simmons, Chris Harris. All unrestricted free agents. One of your starting safeties, both of your starting safeties at least on Sunday, and one of the best cornerbacks you've ever had. All unrestricted free agents. Now, these guys are professionals. I get it. I've talked with each and every one of them. They're professionals. They're proud professionals. I get it. But it is human nature when you're going for your next contract that you're going to try to do two things, especially if you know that what you do isn't going to make any difference on wins or losses, right? Your team is not going to the playoffs whether you play amazing or whether you play terrible. So I have seen teams in the past have this happen. Teams in this situation, I've seen it happen. If you're Emmanuel Sanders, what is your incentive not to grab as many catches as you can? Not to keep lobbying for passes, not to keep trying to rack up as many yards as you can, not to put big stats up so you can go into free agency, make yourself some more money? What's the incentive? What's the incentive not to chirp every week about not getting enough targets? Because if you don't get enough targets, you're complaining about it can be something your agent uses for the next time and say, hey, well, my guy just didn't get enough balls. Throw in his direction. And if you do and it works and you get the yards, then great. Then you rack up the stats. If you're Chris Harris, if you're Justin Simmons, you might find yourself going for a pick or two instead of just knocking the ball down. Because that gets you paid, doesn't it? That's the challenge. This is human nature. I'm not saying that all the guarantees are necessarily the best way to go either. Obviously, there is some value in having the carrot of a new contract being dangled in front of you. But do you think the Broncos are going to re-sign? I'll give you the whole list. Theo Riddick, Devontae Booker, Andy Janovich, Emmanuel Sanders, Connor McGovern, Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris, Adam Gotsis, Billy Wynn, Corey Nelson, Chris Harris, Justin Simmons, Will Parks, and Casey Kreider. You think they're going to re-sign all of them? Many of these guys, if not most of these guys, know the Denver Broncos will not be their team next year. And after 3 straight losing seasons, and this one looking more hopeless than the previous 2, can you blame them? So don't be surprised if some of these guys want to think about the future. Chris Harris may be thinking about the future. Talk about him next. 13 more weeks. 13 more football game weeks, not the bye week, of course. That's how long Chris Harris will be a Denver Bronco. That according to Chris Harris. Denver Post Mark Schlereth tweeted out that on his way out the door, Chris Harris said, quote, "I ain't saying nothing, 13 more weeks for me." The idea that somehow this team is going to get all noble on you and everyone's going to, oh, we're a big band of brothers, we're going to stick together and we'll circle the wagons, every cliche you can throw at it. That's not how it works in the pros. It just doesn't. That's the kind of stuff that your high school coaches get you to buy into, that some colleges do. In the pros, what do you hear from everybody? It's a business, right? Chris Harris's business is getting himself a new contract. He can do that in two ways. Performing well, whether his team does or not, mind you, by the way, and not getting hurt. Those are the two ways that Chris Harris can do his business. It's also the best way Emmanuel Sanders can do his business. Or Derek Wolfe. Or Justin Simmons. So the idea that the Broncos are so invested, oh my gosh, there are guys that are. Of course there are. They do care. Nobody likes losing. Don't get me wrong. But the more this is like a business to owners and to players, as billionaires and millionaires arm wrestle every offseason, the idea of what you care about as a fan, all the brotherhood and all those sort of things, they're not really happening the way you think they're happening. And so when a team goes into a death spiral like this, especially this early, and keeps losing games they should have won, there's no more moral victories. There's no more, guys, we got them. No one is rounding the team up in the locker room and saying, guys, we just got to go 10-2 the rest of the way and we got this. That's not the way it works. I ain't saying nothing. 13 more weeks from me, says Chris Harris, according to Mark Schlereth. No reason to disbelieve him. Harris was reportedly angling for a trade in the offseason. Barely wanted to come back in the first place. So the idea that the Broncos will somehow become the team you're hoping for, and that's ignoring the fact that Bryce Callahan is out, Jawan James is out, Kareem Jackson is out, Andy Janovich is out. It just doesn't hold any water. It doesn't make sense given the reality of the situation. You have significant players on this team, four in particular, Harris, Sanders, Wolfe, and Simmons, who are worried about their next deal because all four of those guys can get a big money deal. It's not 1 year, $1 million. They can get a big money deal. It'd be human nature if they didn't necessarily want to put their body on the line on everything. Be human nature, be understandable to me if Emmanuel Sanders in a split second kind of decides, I'm not going to grab that one over the middle and get plastered by a safety and get hurt, miss out on my chance for the big paycheck. Next time the Broncos allow a big hulking running back like Leonard Fournette to plow through everybody like so much tissue paper, think Chris Harris for a split second might realize while trying to square him up, maybe this isn't the smartest move for me. This team's not going anywhere anyway. Why should I get hurt for it? I don't understand it. You have to remember, in the NFL, when a player has a contract, it doesn't mean anything. What you got in your signing bonus is all that matters. You get hurt, oh, well, that's too bad. Sorry, we're going to let you go. You have a contract for 4 years? Well, we didn't like it after one. We're going to let you go. We'll move the dead cap money around later. That's how it goes. And if you don't think that players, after a while, realize that and realize if my team isn't really looking out for me, if they're only looking out for their bottom line, well, maybe I should do the same thing. And you know what? Players are. Jadeveon Clowney isn't a Texan. Ezekiel Elliott got paid. Le'Veon Bell got paid. The players are figuring it out. They're starting to use the leverage that they get to get bigger deals, to move themselves to new teams. So the idea that someone like Chris Harris, who's been a tremendous Bronco, undrafted out of Kansas, tremendous. I think of Champ Bailey, Louis Wright, and Chris Harris as the three best cover corners in the history of the team. Apologies to Goose Gonsel, and he was before my time. I know he's up in the Ring of Fame and has a bunch of team records. So let's say 4. And he's saying 13 more weeks for me. So, Broncos country. If Chris Harris is just biding his time until he gets to join another team, should you keep him? Or should you just rip the Band-Aid off? Just move on. Should you trade him for whatever you can get right now? I'll be totally honest. I would. Team's not going to the postseason. The best thing you can do is probably get a better draft pick anyway to start the rebuild that I've been saying since week 1 that this team is in, whether they think so or not. Move him along. Send him somewhere he'd be happier. Get yourself a draft pick or a player you think you can use going forward. Because in 13 more football weeks, Chris Harris is gone. He's walking away. The Broncos don't want to pay him the money he wants, and he doesn't even want to be here anymore. And this is a guy that has given the Broncos everything. He gave them a hometown discount on his previous contract, a big one. So don't think it's some sort of disloyalty. It's that he knows how this works. It's a business. That's how the teams treat it. It's how the players should treat it too. So it wouldn't bother me. So if I were to say it's time to trade Chris Harris, that's fine. Time to trade Chris Harris. Get what you can. Makes sense? Works for me. The question I would ask you is, should he be the only one? Should you be moving away from all as the free agents you can afford to move on from? As many as you can. The RamosLaw.com text line, 303-713-1043. You can call or text. Talk about it. So that's the question, I think, Broncos fans. Are you willing to give up on the season? Do you realize the playoff chances have evaporated? Or do you still believe? And if you still believe, hey, help me out. I'm here 5 nights a week, 3 hours a day by myself in the booth here. If you have something to give me a little bit of hope over the next 13 weeks, something that I've missed, please enlighten me. Until then, we'll find out who could be on the trade block, who makes sense to be on the trade block, maybe who should be next. We'll talk about that. Same thing. Next. 13 more weeks left in the football season. 13 more weeks is how many weeks Chris Harris has left as a Denver Bronco. Just according to Mark Kisla, who reported that's what Harris told him. As you can imagine, got a few opinions about that. So we'll go to the phones for a little bit. Start with Mike. Mike, how are you?
Yeah, hey, Sean, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Hey, I mean, I'm a lifelong Bronco fan, and just watching what the current administration has done to the team and the roster, it's easy to see that this is a very poorly conceived and constructed team. And I have no problem with trading assets to get picks, like something or like the Raiders did with Khalil Mack, which is great, except for the fact that who's going to pick those players? You're going to let John Elway stay and miss year after year after year. I mean, he's had 7 consecutive years of very underperforming drafts. So now you're going to trade away assets, which I get it, but you're going to let him take another crack at this and screw it up again. I don't see it. He's either got to trade these players for known quantities, or you got to just stand pat until the end of his contract and let him continue to grind this team into the ground and then start over at whatever point you can find somebody who's a competent general manager, because he certainly has proved not to be. I mean, all the power in the world for him attracting Peyton Manning, that was the luckiest one-of-a-kind ever signing in the history of the Broncos, but luck is not a strategy for success. Being good at your job is what's the strategy for success. So I just don't know if you trade away your assets, which makes sense, to get better draft choices and stockpile the chance to get some young talent and let it grow and really blow this thing up. But you have to have some confidence in the guy who's actually going to be making those picks. And I don't know how anybody over the last 7 years worth of track record can think that this is a good idea to fix it, because all you are is getting rid of the Von Millers and replacing them with God knows who the Adam Gottsises or the, whatever miss after miss after miss we've had in the first 3 rounds for the last 7 years since he's been doing this.
Thanks, Mike. And that's a good point. And I think that sentiment's going to be shared by a lot of people. We talked about it at the very beginning. What I told you all in the very beginning. The players and the coaches have changed from last year to this year, right? Joe Flacco is the quarterback instead of Case Keenum. Vic Fangio is the coach instead of Vance Joseph. But the Broncos are on an 8-game losing streak now that bridges both those years. If we still had Vance Joseph over here, I guess you could kick him around and say, that's his fault. If you still had Case Keenum over here, you could kick him around and say, it's his fault. But you can't. They're both gone. And nothing has changed. It's all new people. And it becomes more and more difficult to ignore. It's not the players. If it's not the coaches, is it the front office? Is it the training staff? Because injuries have been a problem too. Is it a little bit of both? Training staff's part of the front office, I suppose. Lump it all together. That's the problem. You have players, coaching staff, and front office. Those are the 3 main parts of a football team, right? Well, 8-game losing streak. It's not all the same players. 8-game losing streak, not all the same coaches. It is, however, the same front office. Bryant, let's go to you. How are you, Bryant?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Sean?
Oh, okay. I've had better Mondays, but
Right. Going back to trading Chris Harris, I think it's time to pull the plug. He doesn't want to be here. I'm totally on board with you. He's got 1 year left. See what you can get with him. Also, on the offensive side, I think you need to start shopping Emmanuel Sanders out. And I hate to say it is a rebuilding year, and maybe it's time we see what the young bucks from the last couple drafts have. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Bryant. And obviously, that's what you'd have to do. Now, the question for the Broncos is, if you choose to go that route, who are you going to get? Now, obviously, it depends on what you're going to get in trade. By and large, teams aren't trading too many players by players as after the season begins. We're seeing it more than we used to, but it's not generally going to be the key and core to all of it. But the question is, what do you give up? So, if you have Emmanuel Sanders and you move on, that means that Deshaun Hamilton is likely your new starter. Are you okay with that? Now, I think people have had maybe got a little too jumpy about throwing the baby out with the bathwater after his drop for a touchdown, which I get. But actually, Hamilton looked pretty good yesterday. 3 catches for 57 yards. He looked all right. Are you okay with Hamilton being a starter? This is the other part of the equation, right? Are you willing to basically punt this season? Because if you want to move away from Sanders, Deshaun Hamilton is a starting wide receiver for you. If you want to move away from Chris Harris, Isaac Yiadom's a starter. Because we have no idea when Bryce Callahan's playing. Devontae Bosby has been in his spot. So your starting corners, by the way, are Isaac Yiadom and Devontae Bosby if you trade Chris Harris Jr. You okay with that? You literally may not win a game. No, I'm not joking. Those drop-offs are immense. If you wanted to do the same with Derek Wolfe, another guy that might be able to get you something that's a free agent at the end of the year, okay? You might have to start DeMarcus Walker. He actually appeared. I saw him make a couple tackles. So that was good. But are you okay with that? Are Broncos fans finally... Remember, this is a team that hadn't had back-to-back losing seasons in many, many, many years. And when I say many, many years, it's not like, oh, it's a couple. Because those are remembering, even folks who remember the Broncos for a while, they're like, yeah, they've had a couple bad years. But yet they hadn't had back-to-back losing seasons since 1972. They had back-to-back losing seasons in 2017 and 2018. They're going to have one again in 2019. You have to still go back to 1972 for that streak. Because since 1972 until 2017, the Broncos had never had just 2 back-to-back losing seasons, let alone 3 or 4. And if you're starting at 1972, so you're talking about 1970, 1971, 1972. If they have a losing season next year, the Broncos wouldn't have had one since they were in the AFL. That's how far back this goes. Fans, we might have to come to the conclusion here, and I think some have. The Super Bowl 50 win was sort of the last vestige of the Pat Bowlen era. And I know he was not taking day-to-day activities with the team for years. I understand that. But there was still the idea that he was there. They were fulfilling all the ideas, the things that they had learned from him. I get that. Now ownership is in a trust. Now you have some of the kids fighting over who's going to run it. And keep in mind, as far as it's been reported, it's not really who gets to be the owner. If the team ever sells, all 7 kids split it equally. So they all get the same amount of money. The question is, who gets to be the person who runs it? And with all due respect to Beth Bowlen Wallace or to Brittany Bowlen, the 2 that appear to want it the most, what's your presumption that either one of them is going to be as good as Pat Bowlen at it? Odds are probably pretty bad that either would be. The Peyton Manning acquisition, which give John Elway credit for, basically pushed this situation back in an almost unprecedented fashion around the NFL. You had a team, and keep in mind, before Manning got here, by the way, before Manning got here in the 2012 season, here were the Broncos' records from 2005 through 2011. 9-7, 7-9, 8-8, 8-8, 4-12, 8-8. This has been a mediocre team at best for the last 13 seasons, except for the 4 years that Peyton Manning was in town. It's not a coincidence that that was the case. John Elway gets credit for landing Peyton Manning. But that 4-year blip, 2012 through 2015, that's the Peyton Manning era in Broncos history. He was responsible for that more than anybody. That's the important part of this equation here. When you see a car in the Indy 500 win, yeah, there's a team behind it, right? The Roger Penske car or whatever, that's fine. But you know who won the Indy 500? The driver. The driver won the race. John Elway was maybe the guy in his ear, I guess. But Peyton Manning was driving the Indy car. He's the one that took it across the finish line. He's the common denominator of those winning seasons. Not even Von Miller is. Because Von Miller's on this team now, and they're losing. I don't blame it on Von at all. But the thing that made this team good, a 12 and 13 game winner, that was because Peyton Manning was here. And people came to the team to play with Peyton Manning. Otherwise, we are talking about a 13-year run of mediocrity. And nobody would have been immune to criticism. Why is it happening now? We'll talk about that next. You want to know the effect that Peyton Manning had on the Denver Broncos? Just wrap your head around this span of time. Manning was here for 4 seasons. The Broncos' regular season record in that span was 50-14. 50-14. So think about that. That's a winning percentage, by the way, of 78.1%. Since then, since the 2005 season that I was referring to earlier, 2005, when the Broncos got to the AFC Championship with Jake Plummer. Since then, from basically 2006 to 2011 and 2016 to now, removing Peyton Manning from the equation, in that 9+ seasons, the Broncos are 64-84. 20 games under 500 with a winning percentage of 43.2. So you're talking about 14 seasons. 13 and change, I guess. 13 and a quarter, if you'd like to be specific. That's how long we're going back. The 4 years with Peyton Manning, 78% winning percentage. The nearly 10 years without him, 43% winning percentage. 20 games under 500 since 2005 if Peyton Manning isn't on your roster. Now, the trick is John Elway took over right before the 2011 draft. So he's had 4 years and change without Peyton Manning and 4 years with Peyton Manning. So Elway's record looks phenomenal. But I think if you look at this team and zoom out a little bit, you see that the situation is a little different. The Manning years were a blip. For most now of nearly 14 seasons, the Broncos have underwhelmed. And it's worth noting, by the way, that since the 2005 season, the most the Broncos have won in any season without Peyton Manning on the roster is 9. That's the most. Since the 2005 season, the only time the Broncos have gone to the playoffs without Peyton Manning was in 2011 with Tebow. They hadn't been there the 5 years before, and they haven't been there the 4 years after. Includes this one. So 3 years after, and then this one will be 4. The idea that you have a honeymoon period after a team wins a Super Bowl, you don't have to go any further than right here in Denver to prove it. This team was not good for 6 seasons. Now, they didn't have losing seasons. In fact, they only had 2 losing seasons in that span and went 8-8 3 times. But everyone who looks around says, but this is Denver. We expect playoffs. We expect excellence. Okay. Well, you weren't getting it. 6 straight years, the best record you had was 9-7. They went 9-7, 7-9, 8-8, 8-8, 4-12, 8-8. Yawn. That's about as bland as you can get. With the exception of that 4-12 year, they were 500 for 6 years. 5 of those 6, literally 500, 1 year, 4-12. So they won one, and they won one playoff game in that span. They appeared in 2, won 1. Okay. Peyton Manning comes to town. You go 50-14. You go to 2. You don't miss the playoffs ever. You miss one Super Bowl chance where you get smoked, and then the other one you win. You don't think that matters? Go ask a Chiefs fan how that feels. They've been playing a pretty long time, just as long as Denver. They don't have one. Denver's got 3. So there is a honeymoon period, and that honeymoon period is deserved. It is real. But because it came at the same time that John Elway did, we may have mistakenly misunderstood how all this came about. That's the problem. It's easy to see how this could happen. When you're a scientist, right, and you're experimenting, I don't know if you go all the way back to junior high school lab or whatever, what do you need to really tell something? You might look at something and say, well, I think it's this. But I can't really tell because these two things both seem to be happening at once. What do you need? You need more data, right? You need more information. That's what you need. Well, Broncos fans, it took you a while to get it. The first year, you had Von Miller. There was the fun of the Tim Tebow year, which it was fun. Really strange football, but fun. And they made it to the playoffs. Very, very fortunate. Somehow won the division at 8-8. One of those weird years. Okay. Kind of throw that one out. Then you have the 3 years post-Peyton Manning. They've been bad. They've been real bad. And they appear to be getting worse. So where do you go? Let's just look at the time since Elway jumped on. Okay? They won the division in 2011. Like I said, 8-8. A little weird, but that's fine. In 2016, the Broncos went 9-7, and they finished third in the AFC West. But they were fortunate to win first. So the 4 years Peyton Manning is here, first place, 4 straight AFC West titles. They get the AFC West title the year before Manning comes with Tebow. Whatever. It's strange, but we'll count it. Just as we'll count the 9-7 year, which isn't disastrous, in third place. But again, with Manning, 4 years, 4 AFC West crowns. Without Manning, 4 years, 1 AFC West crown, 2 third places, and a 4th. And this year, you're looking at a 3rd or 4th also. So we're getting more data. Go back to the phones, talk to Evan. Evan, how are you?
Hey, how's it going, my man?
I'm all right.
Right on. I like to hear that. So I'm just curious, what do you think the solution is? Are we just going to go back to a 500 team, or if that's even possible? Or are we ever going to possibly be a championship team? I mean, what are your thoughts on it, my man?
Well, I mean, I think they can get back to being a 500 team because I think getting to 500 in the NFL is something that's achievable. It's getting to the next level of being a year-in, year-out playoff team that's incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. So how do they go about doing it? Thanks, my man.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate the call. Well, how do they go about doing it? It is an interesting discussion, and there are a few different ways. But what you have to look at, like I said, is the data, right? Let's look at just more data, more information. Now we have some. You couldn't separate the Elway administration, if you will, from Peyton Manning. They overlapped too much. 4 out of 5 years. They overlapped. By the time they won Super Bowl 50, they had overlapped 4 out of 5 years. You couldn't tell. Was it a chicken or the egg? Well, now we're coming into the 4th year later. You can tell it was a little more one than the other. It usually is, because players win games, not front offices. We'll talk about how that can change and if it will change next. So what do the Broncos do? We've talked about this now. Broncos are on an 8-game losing streak. That 8-game losing streak goes back to last season. So it doesn't obviously count as an 8-game losing streak, but it's telling because it bridges 2 different rosters and 2 different coaching staffs, yet they're still losing. Maybe they're losing closer under Vic Fangio, but they're still losing. And the last 4 games of the year, when you have a losing campaign and everybody knows it, well, that's a little bit different, isn't it? When the Broncos went into their 4-game losing streak, they were 6-6. They won their last game on December 2nd over the Cincinnati Bengals. After that, they lost to the 49ers, Browns, Raiders, and Chargers in sequence to go 6-10. Vance Joseph was fired. Case Keenum was traded. And the current alignment of the Broncos came into play. You could argue those were maybe as important as these 4 games. They become less important every time the Broncos lost at the end of the season because playoffs became further and further away. But these first 4 were games you really wanted to get out of the chute and play well. They haven't. Right now in points, they rank 26th in the league. In points surrendered on defense, they rank 16th in the league. Middling on one, bad on the other. And that's with, by the way, an offensive quote-unquote explosion. So where do they go? Well, the secret lies in a couple different things. The free agents that the Broncos have signed and the draft picks that the Broncos have selected. I made the argument, and I've made it before, I'll make it again, that in 2018, following the disastrous 2017 draft, Elway and company in the front office did a better job. Stopped just grabbing athletes and hoping they could play football and started getting football players and hoping that they could compete at the highest level. Hasn't worked. Doesn't work for anybody. Nobody hits on all the draft picks. But when you saw the nadir of that in 2017 with Garrett Bowles, DeMarcus Walker, Carlos Henderson, Brendan Langley, Jake Butt, Isaiah McKenzie, D'Angelo Henderson, and Chad Kelly. That was the entire draft class, by the way. DeMarcus Walker's on the team. Garrett Bowles is on the team. Garrett Bowles has led the league in holding since he's come into the league, but I guess he started for you. So there's that. DeMarcus Walker's done a little bit, but those are your first and second round draft picks. Consider the first and second round draft picks in 2018. Bradley Chubb and Cortland Sutton. It's not even comparable. Look at even 2019's first and second draft choices. Noah Fant and Dalton Risner. It's not comparable there either. On Reisner, said Risner. Monday, I tell you. So the Broncos have done better in the last couple drafts. I think they have. I really do. But they have missed on so many drafts prior to that, from 2017 to basically, rare exception, to 2011, that they just don't have that much depth. That's a problem. Your 2017 draft should have tons of players on the Broncos, right? They had a first rounder, a second rounder, 2 third rounders. Should have at least those guys should still be on your team. This is only 2 years after. Jake Butt has dealt with the injury situation. Of course, you knew that coming in when they drafted him. DeMarcus Walker and Bowles are on the team. Everybody else, gone. Everybody. All of them. See you later. 2016, you have some guys contributing. Adam Gotsis is on the team. He starts. Justin Simmons starts. Devontae Booker is on the team. Third string guy. Connor McGovern is your starting center. He shouldn't be, but that's beside the point. Andy Janovich is on the team. Will Parks is on your team. Okay. Not too bad, except you completely and totally whiffed on your first-round pick that you traded up to get. You traded up to get a quarterback in the first round, and the guy was an abject disaster. Of course, we're talking about Paxton Lynch. I am not calling for anyone's job. I am explaining the difficulty of the situation. And it speaks to a few things. One of the drawback of having all-time greats handle your team, it works well. And I'm gonna go away from the Broncos, okay? I'll give a couple other examples in town. Walt Weiss managed the Colorado Rockies for a little bit. Certainly not of the level of John Elway. But the Rockies should have moved on from him faster than they did. They didn't want to because it's Walt Weiss. The fans loved him. Patrick Waugh had a great year his first year of coaching with the Avalanche. He won the Jack Adams Award for Coach of the Year. After that, though, things started to fall apart. And the Avs were put in the unenvious position of having to have Joe Sakic, one of your all-time greats, possibly fire Patrick Waugh, one of your all-time greats. Fortunately, Waugh, in a fit of pique, try to get a little French-Canadian there, quit via a television network in Canada. That's how Sakic found out. So that solved it for him. So the question here is if John Elway's job as GM in the post-Peyton Manning era has given us more data to realize that he might not be cut out for this job after now this 9th year on it, right? So the question is, what do you do? Would you like a new GM? Okay. Who's going to fire John Elway? Well, let's say they went down that road. Let's say the Broncos went down that road and decided, all right, you know what? The cupboard's been bare from all these bad drafts. They keep signing free agents that already have injury histories and then they get hurt or they underperform. It's probably time to move on. And I think it's perfectly fair to argue that if John Elway's name was Steve Jones, he already might not be the GM. Or we'd certainly be talking about him having to get this season in order quick, or he's going to be looking for a new gig. But John Elway has earned the capital that he has in this town. How much credit you think you should get for it or not, he did land Peyton Manning. He enabled that era to exist. After he did that, he was not the driving force for it. Manning was. But he enabled it to exist. He's the greatest player in Broncos history. Heck, he's the most significant athlete in Colorado history. Period. It's not even close. There's nobody. He retired, folks. It was 20 years ago. Still the most significant athlete in Denver history. Who wants to fire that guy? Think Joe Ellis wants to fire that guy? The folks who listen here to The Fan, obviously, you're big sports fans. That's why you're listening to this station. And thank you for it, by the way. But go walk into Empower Field at Mile High. I got it right. 78,000 people are there. I'm not joking. Bet you 30,000 of those people, if you said, what do you think about Joe Ellis, have no idea who that is. And that's okay. That's fine. You don't have to be a fan and know all that stuff. It doesn't matter. You're going to watch the game because you're watching the players. Because the players play, the players win. The players play. That's who you're paying for. Nobody pays to go watch the president of the business operations, right? So you probably have 30,000 people in that stadium on any given Sunday who have no idea who Joe Ellis is. Joe Ellis makes a lot of money. Joe Ellis is the de facto owner of the Broncos. He may not have put all the money in to be the owner per se, but there's a trust that's in charge of it. He's in charge of the trust. What he says goes. He's the de facto owner. You think he wants to fire John Elway? Because the guy who fires John Elway, by the way, will be known by all 78,000 people. in the stadium. And probably not going to be beloved. Because I'm going through the RamosLaw.com text line right here. That's 303-713-1043 if you want to call in or text in, participate. It works both ways. It's about 2/3, 1/3. And about 1/3 of those people are saying, give Elway a chance. He's getting better. He'll figure it out. He got us a Super Bowl. You want to be the person that fires that guy. Of course Joe Ellis doesn't. I wouldn't either.
But Sean, then how long are we going to keep this going for?
Till John Elway feels like he wants to quit.
So we could go 10 years of this black hole that we're stuck in.
Conceivably.
Because Joe Ellis doesn't have the you-know-what to fire John Elway.
Actually, I would argue, you know what I'll argue? It's not that. He's smart enough not to. What does it matter to a certain extent? Think again. You're trying to, this is the theme for the night, right? The NFL's a business. Chris Harris told Mark Kisla 13 more weeks. NFL's a business. NFL teams are profitable on day one. You can go 0-16. It doesn't matter. The TV contract alone makes them profitable. You have a hard salary cap. Your costs are basically set every year. You know what the contracts are on television. That's not merchandising. That's not video games. That's not everything else. Kaboom. You can't lose. You can't lose. That's why every time one goes on sale, billionaires line up to pay more and more exorbitant costs to buy one. If you're the guy in charge of that, why would you do anything to risk your standing for that? Anything. The answer is you wouldn't. You wouldn't do that. And this is where the hard part is. As fans, you're looking at it and say, well, geez, you have to do what's best for the team. Sure, I get that. I agree. But as the guy who gets to be a lot of money running the show, gets to call all the shots, why would you paint a target on yourself by firing the most beloved athlete in the history of the state? I wouldn't. I wouldn't even think about it. Because here's the catch. Whenever Joe Ellis decides to hang it up, whenever he decides to pick an owner, right? Whenever all the lawsuits are done and let's say they go with Brittany Bolin in 10 years from now, he's going to retire and he'll be able to walk around town and no one will know even who he is. No one's going to bother him. But he'll walk away with a whole ton of money. Why would you be the guy who risks getting booed around town for the rest of your life because you fired John Elway? I wouldn't. I don't blame Joe Ellis for not doing it. Vic Fangio had an opportunity to talk to the fans through you, through the media, over at the UC Health Center today. We'll hear from the coach next. The Denver Broncos are 0-4 after losing at home to the Jacksonville Jaguars in basically every way possible. Leonard Fournette ran them over. Gardner Minshew danced through what seemed like the entire team before delivering a touchdown in one of the more phenomenal plays I've seen in a long time. Broncos defense didn't offer the kind of resistance it was supposed to. The Broncos offense looked good at times, but had a critical turnover too. Coach Vic Fangio had to talk about that. Oh, and they lost Bradley Chubb for the year. That too. So, not an enjoyable press conference for Vic Fangio today. Sounded a little bit like this. That was Vic Fangio, not Joe Flacco. Vic Fangio talking today about the Broncos situation, and it is indeed dire. Well, looking at the schedule going forward, where can they turn it around? We'll talk about that next. Not a big negative. Well, okay, I'm not going to pile on. I sort of get where he's going there. The team is upset about losing, and so they're maybe hollering a little bit. Some of it's going to be at each other. Some of it may not be. But I understand that there are guys that are frustrated, and that's going to be something that gets them hollering after the game. I get that. That does not bother me. But I'm not sure that I agree with the rest of it, because I want to go back to what he said about Chris Harris Jr. Chris Harris Jr. told Mark Kiszla of the Denver Post on his way out on Sunday from the locker room, he said, I ain't saying nothing. 13 more weeks for me. That to me, I'll be totally honest, that seems like a big deal. That seems like, whether it's fair or not, seems like a guy that might be thinking about packing it in. Now, I think Chris Harris is a professional and he won't. But to go ahead and tell somebody, look, Mark Kiszla is not Joe Schmo from Nowhere Towns Gazette, okay? Kiszla's been covering this team since the 80s, and I think most of the players understand who he is. If you say that to him, I think you know it's going in the papers. So I think Chris Harris Jr. is smart enough to know that that was going to go in the papers. It was going to get reported. I ain't saying nothing. 13 more weeks for me. Here's how Vic Fangio explained it as his level of concern. Really? That's just common? I didn't hear Emmanuel Sanders say that. I haven't heard Derek Wolfe say that. Haven't heard Justin Simmons say that. I'm not sure I'd agree and say that that's common. I thought it was somewhat unusual. So did Kiszla. That's why he mentioned it. Because it was uncommon. If you're a Broncos fan and you're a little frustrated, Kevin and I talked about this. Kevin Kistner in the booth at Kistner Radio on Twitter. We talked about this earlier today when we were putting the show together. What classifies as something you're worried about?
Yeah, everything.
Hollering at each other in the locker room doesn't.
Everything he's talked about. Well, it doesn't
Chris
bother
Harris
me.
basically saying, I have 13 more weeks here and I'm out. That doesn't bother you. They just need to turn things around and get things right. What qualifies as a big deal?
Everything he's talked about. It doesn't bother me right now. I'm not worried about that. When are you going to be worried about something? You're 0-4.
I mean, what's worrisome? What reaches the point of being something to be worried about? I'm not suggesting you freak out and panic. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think I'm going to talk about Chris Harris's issue and say, yeah, that's common. Because it's not common. That's just wrong.
I don't hear players talking about that ever.
Not in public. Not to the media. No. That's what you say when you're an NBA player who wants to get traded. You hear that sort of stuff. It's not at all common. And it is worrisome. You're talking about a guy that is probably your second best player on your roster. Certainly your second most decorated player on the roster. And his response is, I ain't saying nothing. I've got 13 weeks more. Whew. Okay. Well, someone let me know when something is worrisome, I guess. Let me know when I should be concerned. Because the whole 0-4 start is throwing me a little bit. We were trying to research it ourselves. Kevin and I were trying to figure out the last time the Broncos started 0-5. Couldn't find it. Haven't gone through everything since 1960, but we couldn't find it. You're going to go to L.A. and face a Chargers team that's better than you, Broncos. You had 6 wins last year, Broncos. The Chargers had 12. That is quick math. Can't really move my. Gotta check the pinky. Double yours. Double your wins last year. Phillip Rivers is still there. Oh, well, at least there's the holdout for Melvin Gordon. Nope, that's actually over. He'll be back. Oh, who are you missing? Bradley Chubb? Oh, okay. Maybe Josie Jewell? Okay. Maybe Kareem Jackson? Okay. Bryce Callahan? Okay. So maybe 4 starters on defense will be gone for that game? Neat. Let me give you an idea, too, how the Broncos defense broke down. Yes, I meant the pun. Against the run. Fangio talked about how it happened basically in the second half. He is correct. It did. That's quite right. It did. Coming into the game, the Jaguars averaged about 87 yards per game on the ground. That's what they were averaging. They're not averaging that now, but that's what they were coming in. Here's the next few teams on the Broncos schedule of what they're averaging on the ground. Next is the Chargers with 103.5 a game. All of them but a couple carries without Melvin Gordon. Still averaging 16 yards a game more on the ground than Jacksonville was coming in. And I understand Leonard Fournette's raw talent, but I'll make the argument that Melvin Gordon's been a better NFL player. So that's a little scary. Next up would be Tennessee. They're averaging 119 yards a game. That's 12th in the league. Derrick Henry has been clomping all over teams. Almost 100 yards a game this season. Following that is Kansas City. Their 101.8 is 20th in the league. So, okay, maybe not too bad. Yet that's still 14 more yards per game than even Jacksonville was averaging coming into Denver. Oh, and by the way, they're not really a running team. They have this Patrick Mahomes guy. He hands out touchdowns like Pez candy. After that is Indianapolis. They're just 6th in the league, 132.5 per game. Following that is Cleveland, 115 a game. You might have seen Nick Chubb, by the way, yesterday, just running roughshod over people, through people, around people, by people. If you get through that, oh, that's all right. The next 2 weeks, you only have the second and third best rushing teams in the league. Minnesota Vikings with Dalvin Cook averaging 155.3 on the ground. And then after that, Buffalo's coming in, averaging 147.3 on the ground. Then you get the Chargers again. And then Houston, 120.3 on the ground. Every single team the Broncos will face into December at this point is averaging a minimum of 14 yards per game on the ground more than Jacksonville was coming in. And you saw what they did to the Broncos defense. Coach Fangio said that he didn't think tackling was a problem for them until this game. Well, it was, and it is. And here's the problem. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. What do you think? Where do they go next? What can the Broncos do to turn things around? And what does turn things around even mean right now? RamosLaw.com, text line 303-713-1043. Get on that way, and we'll talk to you next. Things have been popping, as you would have expect, on the RamosLaw.com text line tonight. Lot of good responses. Some not so good, but mostly pretty good. One of them, how did the Broncos get fixed? Sandy. Well, you'll have to ask that in just about 10 hours when Sandy's on with Orlando. My name's Sean. Nice to meet you. Thank you for listening. Did you see Leonard Fournette truck Justin Simmons on that one play? Yes, I did. The defense looked gassed in the second half. Yes, they did. They did. From the 740, aren't the defensive players conditioned to play? Don't they do strength training? Who does the strength and conditioning coaching? I'm an old lady, and I could kick half of their Okay. You know, the truth of the matter is they did look a little bit gassed. Some of the Broncos have occasionally muttered about the schedule that Vic Fangio has. It's a bit of an old school one. One from the 970. For the record, I have fully torn an ACL and partially torn an ACL. My partial tear was much more painful and took way longer to heal than a full tear surgery. Yes, absolutely true. I have not gotten the ACL. I've gotten the MCL, and I've gotten the PCL, and I got the LCL. And yes, when they tear all the way through, it actually doesn't hurt that bad. You just, of course, can't move right. But when you tear it a little bit, oh, it hurts. It hurts. Either way, Bradley Chubb will be out for the year. Go get Shane Ray, one of our texts. That's not going to happen. Want to take a minute? We'll get back to some of your texts, but I want to talk to Jordan here. Jordan, how are you?
Good, Sean. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right.
Good. I wanted to talk a little bit about Chris Harris's comments to Mark Kisla. Sounds like the guy's already checked out, and last time I checked, I think we gave him pretty much a bonus and a salary raise for pretty much not sitting out camp. And if he's checked out, how many other players have already checked out, and what's the rest of the season going to look like?
Well, that's a fair question, isn't it? Because one of the things I brought up earlier is you have Emmanuel Sanders, you have Justin Simmons, you have Derek Wolfe. All those folks are free agents, Jordan. And so what do you think that those guys might be thinking the same thing?
I think they look towards the future, and they don't see much, a bright light at the end of the tunnel. I think this team is in between a rebuild and a reboot, but the only guy that can't seem to figure that out is John Elway. He keeps wanting to put Band-Aids over bullet holes, and he's been doing the same thing for the last 4 years. You gotta make a choice. Are you going to go one way with, the young talent, or are you going to keep these old vets, Derek Wolfe, Sanders, Harris, around? And I think it's the question moving forward, and I don't even think Elway can figure that out. Apparently he can't, because he hasn't done it since Peyton Manning retired.
Thanks for the call, Jordan. Appreciate it. And you bring up some good points. This is the challenge. And we've had a couple callers earlier today bring up a good point as well. Okay, let's say you trade Chris Harris, a Derek Wolfe, Emmanuel Sanders. Let's say you make those trades. Like, all right, let's just stockpile for the draft. Let's make those deals, and let's see what we can do. Okay, you can do that as long as you're willing to understand that your team is going to be disastrous. I mean, really, 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 really bad. And if you're like, okay, fine, we're going to rebuild. But here's the question. If poor drafting and an indecision on whether you should stick with older guys or build with younger guys, and you could put the Joe Flacco signing as Exhibit 1A, in my opinion, on that for the indecisiveness. You only sign Joe Flacco if you think you can get to the playoffs. You do. And I wondered how they could get to the playoffs. I never at any point looked at this team, at this roster, and said, this is a playoff team. It isn't. It wasn't. They have some good top-end talent guys, but they don't have any depth. I mean, any depth. And they weren't really a playoff team. But the front office thought they were. Otherwise, you don't go get Joe Flacco. You go get Joe Flacco because you're trying to kind of have it both ways. You're trying to go young but still have veterans all at the same time. It just doesn't really work that way. I think Jordan's calls and his points very, very, it's incisive. You're right. Trying to have it both ways doesn't work. But if you trade away those guys And the same person who has made the decisions that seem to be getting you into this mess is the same person who's going to make the decisions of what to do with those draft picks. Then how do you really help? And this is the problem that the Broncos find themselves in. I'm not sure that I'm willing to go as far as say John Elway is the problem with this team, that the front office is the problem with this team. But I am comfortable with saying that what they've been doing over the last year has seemed rather rudderless. They've improved in the way they've drafted. In 2018, 2019, much better drafts. Much better drafts. Not saying every player is going to stick. They won't. Not saying there weren't players in previous drafts that aren't good. There were. But on the whole, much better drafts. Going and getting football players and hoping their talent translates as opposed to getting talents and hoping that their football skills translate. History has shown you're better off getting guys who just know how to play football and hope they can figure out a way to put it together and do enough with their athleticism. You want to go get the elite athlete, that's fine. That's how you end up with Jamarcus Russell. You got to find guys who can play. You find guys who know how to play football, and maybe they turn into Gardner Minshew's. Guy whose athletic talent at the NFL level is definitely on the low side. Looked like the best quarterback on the field on Sunday to me. Back to the text, talking about Von Miller and his roughing call. That roughing call was touchy. I didn't really have a problem with it. I understood he kind of got hit, maybe a little bit got pushed, but I didn't have a problem with it. In real time, I watched it. I saw the flag, and I looked at it, and I'm like, no, okay. It's a rough.
Got him in the neck.
Yeah, you can't get up under the face like that. You can't. I mean, they're very clear on that. I'm sorry, but that's the rule. I had no problem with the call.
Just because he gets knocked down and his hand goes up,
you're still responsible for your own body. That's the way it goes. And at a certain point, I would say to the team's credit, to Fangio's credit, the team's credit, I really didn't hear players complaining about the refs. And I don't think they should have. And you know what? When you're not playing well, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. That's the way it is. Sorry. That's how it goes. Someone referring to my reference earlier that hypothetically maybe Tennessee is a winnable game. He said, what? Tennessee's winnable? How about after you watch Derrick Henry hang another 200 on this defense?
Don't forget Mariota is yet to turn the ball over.
Marcus Mariota has yet to turn the ball over. Okay. Joe Flacco has 3 picks and a fumble. Have a little bit more for you, take you to the top of the hour. We'll catch you up on an Avalanche situation. Their regular season starts this week. And boy, they had some big news over the weekend. If you somehow missed it, that's understandable. That's okay. Stick around. I'll tell you next. The Colorado Avalanche will start their season on Thursday, and they will be complete when they do so. In case you missed it, they signed winger Mikko Rantanen to a 6-year, $55 million deal. He was a restricted free agent, runs an average of $9.25 million per. That is, quite frankly, better than I thought they'd get him for something of that length, given the other deals given to Mitch Marner. A terrific move for the Avs when you consider that actually Rantanen and McKinnon combined make $15.5 million. That's about 19% of the team's cap compared to most of the rest of the teams in the league. That's phenomenal. The Avs will start their season against the Calgary Flames on Thursday. And keep an eye out. I mean, they might be a dark horse to win the whole thing. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. They have made a lot of great moves. They are in great shape with a lot of young talent. It's very impressive what Joe Sakic has put together. It took a while for him to get his sea legs. It got to those scenarios where it was a little bit tough. Weren't sure, but boy, it's been impressive watching this team build. There is a significant talent in their system. Bowen Byram, their first-round pick this year, they sent him down to the minors. But between Byram and Alex Newhook, Connor Timmins, there's a lot of very, very good talent there. And in Rantanen and McKinnon, you have two top 20 guys in the whole league. I mean, this is an impressive situation. We will have our fan hockey insider, Adrian Dater, probably be on with us tomorrow. We'll preview that a little bit and talk about the Avs, but wanted to make sure we caught up with that as their season starts this week. They're not 0-4 yet, so there's that. And they are complete after getting Mikko Rantanen in the fold. Had an opportunity to be let in by Monday Night Football. That's not a bad lead in. Of course, in general, this was a bit of a boring game. The Steelers got their first win of the game. They got right against the 0-4 Bengals. Bengals look pretty bad. If you were to look at the power ranking at theathletic.com, they put together their power rankings right off the bat here. They even had the Bengals just ahead of the Broncos. The Broncos were only ahead of Washington and Miami. Yikes. Steelers get it done, start to get right. Talk about a team that it looks like it can make its transition with Mason Rudolph, with James Conner, with Jalen Samuels, with Juju Smith-Schuster. That looks like a team that is going through a rebuild, much like the Broncos. They just haven't figured it out yet after losing Roethlisberger for the year, but they seem to be a little bit further along. So maybe a pattern for the Broncos to follow, hopefully something to that effect. Over in baseball, of course, the postseason starts very soon. And when I say very soon, I mean, tomorrow. Brewers will take on the Nationals in the NL wildcard game. The Rays and A's will be on Wednesday, and then the division series begin in earnest on Thursday. NL will start wildcard winner versus the Dodgers, Cardinals at the Braves. Then on Friday, it'll start over in the AL as well. The wildcard winner versus the Astros, Twins, and the Yankees in the other series. First time in baseball history, 4 100-win teams in the same year. Obviously, they're all in the playoffs. The Los Angeles Angels are moving on from Brad Ausmus, their manager, long time ago. If you remember in the Wayback Machine, former Colorado Rockies catcher Brad Ausmus, after only 1 year. Now, I told a friend of mine that the news that the Cubs were moving away from Joe Madden, I said, okay, well, he's going to go to the Angels. That's going to happen. So bad break for Ausmus, but that is probably what's going to happen. It makes a lot of sense. You'd like to be able to put a big roster, a big money roster, and a guy like Mike Trout with Joe Madden and see what you can do. Their GM, Billy Epler, is in his final year of his contract. So, yeah, that's when you make that kind of move. We'll see how that goes. Interesting enough, too, when the season ended, Tim Anderson of the White Sox won the AL batting championship. That's the first White Sox player to win the batting title since 1997. So there were a lot of other things that were fun in sports, just not the Broncos, who lose their game 26-24 on a last-second heartbreaker. And there's a lot of frustration, obviously. A great deal of frustration over on the RamosLaw.com text line. On the bright side, I'm loving the fight of these young players on offense. Dalton Reisner might be Elway's best pick. Sutton and Lindsey ball when you get the ball in their hand. But time and more new talent are the only cures for the deeper ailments of this team. No panacea exists from the front office to the players to the coaches that will solve all the problems. I love that text. Not just because you said panacea, but also because you said panacea. And put more succinctly, from the 303-919, tanking to get Tua won't fix this issue. It won't, not by itself. Not by itself. Dallin Loveland said, let's start being honest about this team and look at rebuilding. The bad drafts have compounded into a nightmare. No talent, no depth. The Chargers have twice the roster the Broncos do. It's something to think about. 303-648 said, so you say it's okay to splurge on stock show tickets come January. Yes, go get yourself some rodeo seats. You won't be in any trouble with Broncos playoff games. No overlap. Go enjoy. Go watch barrel racing and bull riding and sure. Yeah, go for it. Just go get your tickets now, I guess, if they're for sale now. I don't know if they are. But you won't be having any problems with the Broncos. They're not going to be in the playoffs. It's not going to happen. Here's one of the frustrations that I think fans have a lot. The players, it says, the players have no loyalty to fans as they should, so why should the fans have it to the players? This is about winning, so although it's been great, it's time to move Chris, meaning Harris Jr. The players and loyalty to the fans, here's the thing I'm going to say that's going to sound really unpleasant to fans. I think players appreciate fan support. But I think they understand they work for a company that is a business. And they are part of that business. And so at certain points, when players understand their team is going nowhere. In the NFL, here's one of the amazing double-edged swords of the NFL. The NFL's hard salary cap is what means that you have a chance for every single team to win a Super Bowl if they run their franchise right over a 5-year span. That's what gives the NFL its parity, and that's what makes it so entertaining week to week. There were 14 games this week, and I think in the fan pick'em, Sandy Clough ended up winning it for all our hosts because he got 7 right, 50%. That was it. But the reason that happens is because of the salary cap. The flip side of that is that because of the salary cap, teams move away from players for any reason they can to save a buck or two. They just do. That's how it works. And so when you're Chris Harris's of the world, or Emmanuel Sanders or Derek Wolfe or anybody, look, I disagree with him, but Vic Fangio said it's common. Maybe he's heard some things I haven't. I'm sure he has. For Chris Harris to say, I ain't saying nothing, 13 more weeks for me. Fangio said it was common. Didn't even bother him. So if it doesn't bother the coach, don't let that bother you. The old Jerry Seinfeld joke that you're rooting for laundry isn't all that far off from the truth. The players, by and large, now are transitory. They understand it. They're not transitory necessarily because they want to be. They're transitory because the league has made them. So I don't blame Chris Harris. We'll be talking about this all week, obviously. The Broncos, by the way, have never started 0-5. Kevin Kistner with some crack research. They started 0-4-1 in 1971. Could be in uncharted waters here, folks. We'll talk about it right here with the best Broncos opinions. For Kevin, I'm Sean. We'll hand it over to our friends at SportsCenter Overnight. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you tomorrow at Denver Sports Station, Sports Radio 104.3, The Fan.